Hello everyone. Before you sit back and listen, I want you to do something. Breathe. Because I'm about to open a chapter of my life I've sealed shut for 6 decades. What you're going to hear isn't a ghost story, or a crime novel, or an internet rumor. It's memory. Meaning. Raw and unfiltered. My name is Louise Miller, though most of you know me as Grandma Lou. I'm 73 years old, and I live alone in a little house tucked behind a row of maple trees. People who see me online probably think I spend my days knitting sweaters and baking apple bread. And I do sometimes. But behind those hobbies sits a past darker than anyone has guessed. Viewers often ask, Grandma Lou, why did you start this channel so late in life? The truth? Because at 73, fear can't control me anymore. I grew up in a small American suburb called Riverdale, a place with clean porches, trimmed lawns, and polite smiles. Folks there believed that people didn't change, that good families stayed good forever. They never imagined storms could brew behind trimmed hedges. My childhood looked normal from the outside. A father who worked long trucking routes, a mother who ironed dresses for money, and 3 older brothers, Anthony, Joseph, and Robert. I was the only girl in the family. Everyone called me Princess. And for a long time, I believed them. When Dad came home from the road, he'd lift me into the air and pretend I could fly. He kept candy in his pockets just for me. My earliest memories are of giggles and warm hugs and bedtime stories he read until my eyes closed. I used to think love like that could protect anyone from anything. But life has this way of splitting open your certainty overnight, without warning. It happened to me when I turned 13. That year, Dad started driving longer routes. The front door slammed shut behind him more often, with heavier silence left behind. My brothers, once annoying but harmless, began acting different. They watched me, whispered in corners, and stopped treating me like their sister, and started treating me like something they needed to control. I thought I was imagining it at first. You know how kids are, dramatic, emotional. That's what adults like to say. You're imagining things. But I wasn't. The atmosphere in our house changed first, not actions, not words, but air. Everyday sounds began to feel threatening. Footsteps behind me, doors that closed too quietly, whispers that stopped when I entered a room. Mom saw none of it. She was exhausted, overworked, trusting her sons far too much. Dad wasn't home to see the shift. How his absence became an opening for shadows to move in. Looking back, I think the universe tried to warn me. One night, I dreamed of standing in a field. The sky was purple, the wind loud, and someone behind me whispered, "No one is coming." The next morning I woke shaking. And the fear didn't leave. Then came the afternoon that broke everything open. It was a blazing summer day in 1965. School had ended early because the heat swallowed the classrooms. Mom left for a sewing delivery. Dad was hundreds of miles away on the interstate. I stood in the kitchen washing dishes while the radio hummed old love songs. Sunlight passed through the window, turning every droplet of soap water into glitter. I remember thinking how beautiful it looked, how peaceful that moment was. And I remember how fast peace died. Behind me, footsteps approached, slow, heavy, purposeful. I didn't turn around at first. I thought it was Robert, coming to steal a cookie. Then I heard Anthony's voice, low and strange. "You're growing up, Louise." The dish slipped from my fingers. Glass shattered across the tile like sudden gunfire. I spun around. All 3 brothers were standing there. Anthony too close. Joseph silent. Robert staring. The back door, my only exit, was locked. The key wasn't in the slot. Someone had removed it. My heart pounded so violently I could hear blood rushing through my ears. Something primal inside me whispered, "Run." But before I could move, Anthony blocked my path. Joseph stepped into the doorway behind him. Robert stood to my right, eyes empty. That was the first time I truly realized danger doesn't always come from dark alleys and strangers. Sometimes it grows under the same roof, wearing familiar faces. I opened my mouth to call for Mom, but a voice inside me said she wouldn't hear, even if she was standing in the next room. And that was the moment childhood ended for me. The moment sunlight in that kitchen turned into warning. The moment I learned that silence feeds monsters more than darkness ever could. I took one step backward and felt everything good in my life slipping away like water through fingers. And then someone else stepped into that kitchen doorway. Someone who wasn't supposed to be home. Someone who heard the plate shatter. Someone who would either save me or doom me forever. Who stood in that doorway? And why did that person choose to walk away without saying a single word? When I saw the shadow in the kitchen doorway, every bone in my body screamed with hope. That single silhouette looked like rescue, like the universe had suddenly remembered I was a child who deserved protecting. It was Mom. She stood there with groceries pressed against her hip, hair sticking to her forehead from the summer heat. Her eyes drifted from the shattered plate to the three boys circling me. And for a heartbeat, I felt saved. Truly saved. But then her gaze slid away. She didn't ask why the plate broke. Didn't ask why I was shaking. Didn't ask why all three boys were pressed in around me like walls. Instead, she said in a tired voice, "Clean up this mess before your father comes home this weekend." She walked away. She didn't even realize she left me behind in a shark tank. And the second her footsteps faded down the hallway, I understood something brutal. Adults don't always see danger. Sometimes they choose not to. The air thickened. The brothers didn't blink. Anthony gave a slow grin, pretending her entrance never happened. Where were we? My throat closed. I darted backward. My heel hit a piece of glass, pain shooting up my leg, but I didn't care. I needed escape. I lunged toward the living room. Joseph grabbed my arm. Robert blocked the doorway. Fear isn't loud. It's suffocating silence and a heartbeat so violent you think it will explode. I shoved Joseph away and sprinted to the staircase, grabbing the rail and hauling myself upward 2-3 steps at a time. I don't know how I ran so fast. Instinct makes you superhuman. I reached the top landing. But Anthony was already behind me, footsteps thunderous, breath sharp. He hissed, "You think you can run forever?" I darted into my bedroom and slammed the door, twisting the lock. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the latch. My pulse hammered at my temples. I shoved my dresser against the door and backed away until the closet pressed into my spine. From the hallway came Anthony's voice. "You're making this worse, Louise." Then Joseph, deeper, angrier. "Open the door." Robert whispered, "Please don't." But even he didn't leave. Their shadows gathered beneath the doorway crack. I curled into a ball beside my bed, hugging my knees. The doorknob twisted violently. Wood rattled. My dresser legs scraped against the floor. I stared at my bedroom window, wide, openable, only 6 feet above the back path. If I jumped, I'd hit the ground. Maybe break my leg. Maybe worse. But staying felt deadlier. I opened the window. Hot air slapped my face. Freedom stared back at me. And then, footsteps rushed up the front porch. The boys froze on the other side of the door. A knock echoed through the house. Loud. "Urgent." Anthony whispered. "Who is that?" No one answered. Then a woman's voice called. "Louise? Is everything okay in there?" Mrs. Patterson. Our neighbor. The nosiest, loudest mouth in Riverdale. And in that moment, she sounded like an angel. I almost screamed for help. My lungs filled. My mouth opened. But Anthony hissed through the crack in the door. "If you tell her anything, we'll tell Mom you broke her vase. Dad will beat you. Everyone will think you're crazy." Fear snapped my voice shut. Downstairs, Mom answered the door. I heard her voice, light, casual, lying. "Oh, Louise is fine. She's upstairs reading." The neighbor laughed politely. "Well, if she needs company, send her over." Door shut. Hope gone. Outside my window, the world continued like nothing was wrong. Birds singing. Children laughing somewhere down the street. A dog barking near the fence. Inside, I shook so hard my teeth clacked. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. Eventually, the footsteps faded away. Anthony whispered, "We'll finish this later." The hallway fell silent. Their shadows disappeared. I sat frozen until the sun dipped and the sky bled orange across my walls. That night, when the house finally slept, I crept to the bathroom, locked myself in, and stared at my reflection. My 13-year-old face didn't look like a child anymore. It looked hunted. I touched the bruise forming on my wrist. The skin throbbed. I whispered to my reflection, "They'll kill me." But what terrified me more wasn't the boys. It was the truth forming in my chest. Nobody was coming. Dad was miles away, lost in truck routes. Mom was blind to everything. Neighbors saw perfect lawns, not broken children. So I made a choice. The kind of choice desperate people make. I decided to run away. And that night, as the house went quiet, I learned something sickening. Monsters don't hide under beds, they sleep in the rooms next to yours. I didn't sleep that night. I listened. I listened to the air whistling through the cracks in the window frame, to chairs scraping under my brother's feet downstairs, to Mom humming in the sewing room, and to my own heartbeat thudding like footsteps inside my skull. Every sound felt louder than truth. I waited until the house finally drowned in silence. Silence so deep even mosquitoes outside the window seemed muted. Then I moved. Slowly. Quietly. Like my bones were made of glass. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my school bag, stuffed in some clothes, and tied my hair back with trembling fingers. My room looked exactly like it had the day before. Dolls on shelves, posters on the wall, childish things mocking me. I whispered to them, "I'm not coming back here." I opened the window and climbed out, landing in soft soil. My knees bent hard, but I stayed upright. A stray cat startled at my feet, darting into the darkness. I whispered, "Sorry," and kept moving. The streetlights flickered above me, throwing long shadows across the empty road. That night sky didn't feel like sky. It felt like a lid closing over me. I valked fast, slapping pavement, brett sharp. I didn't look back at the house, because if I had, I might have turned to stone. The bus station sat at the edge of town, past the church and the grocery store. Dad always said you could reach anywhere from there, Chicago, St. Louis, anywhere except home. I kept picturing myself stepping on a bus, sitting by a window, watching Riverdale shrink until it disappeared. Freedom tasted so close I could almost swallow it. Then headlights swept over me. A truck engine. Loud. Familiar. I froze mid-step. The truck slowed beside me, rumbling huge, intrusive. My heart dropped. The driver's window rolled down, and the smell of motor oil and road dust washed over me. It was Dad. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. His daughter, alone, with a bag over her shoulder, at midnight. My throat went dry. "Louise." His voice cracked. "Why are you outside? Where are you going?" My words tangled into nothing. I didn't know what to tell him. The truth? A lie? Silence? Dad parked the truck and got out, boots heavy on the pavement. He walked around the front and stopped just inches from me. "You're shaking," he whispered. I nodded. "Talk to me," he pleaded. "Did someone hurt you?" That question almost split me open. I opened my mouth to speak, but footsteps echoed behind us. Multiple pairs. Anthony's voice cut the night like a blade. "There she is." Dad turned sharply, eyes narrowing. My brothers stood at the corner of the street, breathless, like they'd been running to catch me before I reached freedom. Joseph swallowed hard. Robert avoided looking up. Dad's face changed. Pain, confusion, suspicion swirling behind his eyes. He looked from them to me, back to them. "What's going on?" he demanded. No one spoke. The street fell silent, except for crickets screaming in the grass. I should have told the truth right there. I could have ended everything. But fear grabbed me by the throat and squeezed. I whispered. I just needed air." Dad stared at me like he knew I was lying, but couldn't understand why. Anthony put on a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Kids run around at night, Dad. She's dramatic. That's all." Dad didn't buy it. Not even slightly. He looked at my bag. "What's inside?" I clutched it to my chest. "School things." "You don't have school for 2 months, he answered quietly. My stomach turned. I had slipped. Joseph stepped forward, voice trembling. "We should all go home." Dad shook his head, eyes locked on me. "No. Louise stays with me tonight." Anthony's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He knew challenging Dad would raise questions. Dad placed a protective hand on my shoulder and guided me to the truck. The moment his skin touched mine, I broke. I sobbed. Not loud. Just enough for him to hear. His voice softened. "Princess, what happened?" I shook my head violently. I couldn't speak, not with Anthony watching. Dad opened the truck door for me, helped me inside, then turned back to the boys. "You 3 walk home," he said flatly. We'll talk in the morning. The truck door shut. I exhaled. I wasn't safe yet. But I was safer. Dad drove slowly, eyes glancing at me every few seconds. I'll call the school tomorrow, he muttered. They said you've been distant. Tired. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I should have come home sooner. I stared at the passing streetlights, tears drying on my cheeks. I didn't feel 13. I felt ancient. He parked in the driveway, killed the engine, and breathed deeply, as if preparing for war. Then he whispered the sentence that would change everything. Louise, tomorrow, I want you to tell me the truth, even if it hurts. He didn't know how much it would hurt. And just when I thought the danger stayed inside my bedroom, I heard heavy footsteps outside my door, followed by Anthony whispering my name. The next morning began with a silence so strange, I woke up thinking the world had stopped. Birds weren't chirping. The usual clatter of pans in the kitchen was missing. Even my brother's footsteps weren't thundering through the hallway. It felt like the whole house was holding its breath. Dad stayed awake most of the night, pacing the living room, drinking coffee like water. Every few hours, I heard the floorboards creak beneath his boots. He didn't want to sleep. He didn't want to miss a sound. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone in that house. At sunrise, Dad tapped lightly on my door. Louise. I sat up in bed. Yes. Come down when you're ready. We're going to talk. His voice wasn't angry. It was controlled. Cold. Like ice barely hiding fire. I dressed slowly, hands shaking, breath unsteady. The house smelled like coffee and rain outside. The window rattled from a distant thunderstorm rolling toward Riverdale. When I came downstairs, Dad was sitting at the table with both hands wrapped around his mug. His eyes looked older than they did yesterday, heavy with guilt, suspicion, and something else. Anthony, Joseph, and Robert sat across from him, silent. Their faces told 3 different stories. Anthony smirked in defiance. Joseph fidgeted with his sleeve, eyes red. Robert looked like he hadn't slept at all. Dad didn't look at them. He looked at me. Sit next to me, princess. I did. Mom placed breakfast on the table, pretending everything was normal. But her hand trembled so badly the plates clinked together. Dad spoke first. I called the school nurse. The boy's head snapped up. Anthony opened his mouth. Why? Dad didn't even blink. To check on Louise. Anthony scoffed, but Dad kept his eyes forward. She'll be here soon, he added. Those words were a bomb. Silence exploded into panic. Anthony slammed his chair back. No. If she has an issue, she'll go to school. Dad slowly turned to him, voice low enough to sound like thunder before lightning. Sit down. Even Mom flinched. Anthony sat, jaw tight. Robert stared at his fork. Joseph closed his eyes, shoulders shaking. Dad continued. Before she arrives, I'm asking something once. And I expect real answers. He leaned forward. Why did I find my daughter outside at midnight? Nobody breathed. Anthony cleared his throat. She's dramatic. Dad slammed his fist on the table. The coffee cups jumped. Call her dramatic again, he growled. Anthony, shut up. My chest tightened. I could feel truth crawling up Dad's spine. He was close to figuring everything out. That was when the doorbell rang. 3 knocks. Sharp. Precise. Mom rushed to open it. Relief all over her. This is good, she whispered to herself. Standing there was Mrs. Halliday, the school nurse. She stepped inside with a warm smile, holding a medical bag. Good morning, sweetheart, she said to me. But the smile disappeared when she saw my brothers, lined up at the table, stiff as stone. She paused. Her eyes flicked to Dad. You didn't tell me the boys would be here for this conversation. Dad nodded. They're part of the problem. The boys stared daggers into her, but she didn't flinch. She asked gently, Louise, can we go somewhere private? Before I could answer, Dad said, No. Whatever needs to be said can be said here. Mrs. Halliday hesitated, then nodded slowly. She walked to me, checked my pulse, touched my forehead, and then noticed something on my wrist. She froze. Louise, who grabbed you? Everyone turned toward me. I swallowed. I fell. She stared. Hard. You didn't fall. Anthony stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Dad snapped. A seat. Anthony sat. The nurse leaned closer to him. You seem nervous. He stared straight ahead. She turned to Dad. I'm required to report visible injuries. Those words made my brother stiffen. Dad's fists curled. Report to who? Mrs. Halliday opened her bag and pulled out a clipboard. The sheriff. The entire kitchen froze. Anthony whispered. Dad stood up. You called law enforcement? Mrs. Halliday shook her head. I didn't have to. And then a knock echoed through the house. Loud enough to make plates rattle. A voice followed. Open the door, George. Everyone turned toward the entryway. Because standing outside was Sheriff King himself. Dad opened the door slowly. The sheriff stepped in and looked right at me, ignoring everyone else. Louise, he said calmly, I need to ask you a question. The boys stiffened. Mom covered her mouth. Dad's breathing faltered. Sheriff King kneeled to meet my eyes. No pressure. Just answer honestly. He asked. Are you afraid of your brothers? My throat closed. My heartbeat shook my ribs. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The sheriff thought he was asking the right question, but he didn't know the real danger in our house wasn't sitting at the table. It was just about to knock on the front door. Sheriff King's question hung in the air like thunder that refused to break. Are you afraid of your brothers? Every pair of eyes in the kitchen burned into me. Anthony glaring. Joseph trembling. Robert turning pale. Dad waiting. Mom holding her breath. And the sheriff watching gently, yet closely. I couldn't force my voice out. My throat felt sealed shut by years of swallowed fear. So I did the only thing a terrified 13-year-old could do. I looked away. That silence was louder than any scream. The sheriff stood slowly. He didn't press me. Instead, he turned toward my father. George, he said calmly, I'm requesting permission to speak to each child alone. Dad nodded without hesitation. Yes, do it. Anthony flinched. Joseph froze. Robert whispered something I couldn't hear. Mom tried to interfere. Sheriff, surely this can wait until. No, that snapped. It can't. The sheriff pointed to the living room. Anthony first. Anthony stared at him like he'd been sentenced. He tried to stand tall, shoulders back, chin lifted, but his knees wobbled. As he left the room, he shot me a look so sharp I thought my skin would split. Joseph swallowed. Robert trembled. The kitchen was left with a strange echo. The echo of footsteps leading to truth. Mrs. Halliday sat next to me, patting my hand, whispering, You're not alone anymore. For the first time, I believed her. Down the hallway, muffled voices rose. Anthony's and the sheriff's. Low at first, then louder, then sharp. Then suddenly, silence. Minutes crawled by like hours. And then, Anthony returned. He didn't look like the same boy. His face was drained, his eyes red, and his breathing uneven. Dad stood. Well, Anthony stared at him. At Mom. At me. Then he whispered. I didn't do anything. Nobody believed him. Not after that expression. The sheriff appeared next. Joseph, he said softly. Joseph nearly fell standing up. He followed the sheriff down the hall, shoulders hunched, head down. Anthony didn't look up. Mom didn't look at him at all. Robert gripped the edge of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Dad crossed his arms, eyes scanning every face in the room. He wasn't angry anymore. He was calculating. He was building a map. A timeline. A truth. Mom whispered. This is humiliating. Dad answered without looking at her. This is justice. In the hallway, Joseph's voice cracked into sobs. We all heard it. Even through walls. Pain travels. Minutes later, Joseph re-entered the kitchen. And he didn't sit at the table. He walked straight to Dad. And collapsed. Knees hit the floor. Hands clutched Dad's pants. Tears soaked through fabric. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm sorry. I didn't want to. Anthony made me. I swear I. Anthony slammed his chair back. Shut up. Dad roared. Sit down. Anthony froze mid-step, fear finally showing. Dad knelt to Joseph. What did you do? Joseph couldn't speak at first. Words drowned in sobs. Mrs. Halliday placed her hand on his shoulder. You're safe enough to tell the truth now. Joseph shook his head. No. I'm not. The sheriff put a hand on the doorway frame. You will be. Joseph drew one long breath. And then the house shattered under his whisper. It wasn't only Anthony. Mom gasped. Robert cried out. Anthony's face twisted with rage. Dad stared into Joseph's eyes. Who else? Joseph opened his mouth, but stopped. His eyes shifted to the staircase, to the upstairs bedrooms, to memories trapped behind doors. Then he whispered like a confession to God. Someone else told Anthony everything was okay. Dad stiffened. Joseph pointed. Not at a brother. Not at me. Not at himself. His finger trembled toward our mother. Mom's teacup fell from her hand and shattered. That's a lie, she cried. But Joseph kept talking. Voice breaking, truth ripping out of him. You told us not to bother you with Louise's complaints. You told us she was dramatic. You told Anthony to handle her. Mom shook with rage. No. I didn't tell them to hurt her. Dad whispered. But you told them not to listen to her. Mom stumbled backward. I was tired. I was alone. You were never home. Anthony yelled. Don't blame Mom. But Dad stood and shouted so loud the windows trembled. This house will stop lying. Silence followed. Hot, brutal silence. Then the sheriff broke it with 6 words. Robert, it's your turn to speak. And as Joseph pointed toward our mother, shaking and sobbing, I realized something horrifying. The real villain in our house wasn't just my brothers. It might have been the woman who tucked me into bed every night. When the sheriff said Robert's name, the kitchen changed temperature. Everything warm drained out of the room. What remained felt like frost. Robert had always been the quiet brother, the one who laughed softly, who fixed loose fence boards, who whispered secrets to stray dogs. He was the brother I once trusted. The brother who sat beside me in church and held my hand when thunder scared me. Seeing him tremble now was worse than seeing Anthony rage or Joseph collapse. Silence from the gentle hurts deeper. He stood slowly from his chair, knees shaking, eyes glued to the floor. Sheriff, he whispered. Can we talk alone? The sheriff shook his head. No more secrets in this house. Robert swallowed hard, then looked up. And for the first time, I saw true terror in his eyes. Not the fear of being punished, but the fear of revealing something buried beneath his ribs. Dad leaned forward. Son, whatever you say today, say it clean. Mom froze, fingers digging into the countertop for balance. Robert's voice came out thin, shaking. I didn't want any of this. Anthony scoffed. Oh, here we go, acting innocent. Dad didn't let him finish. Sit down. The floor creaked under Robert's feet as he took a step forward. His breath hitched. And then, with a voice cracking clean in half, he said, it started because someone older told Anthony what to do. Anthony shot up. Don't. Dad slammed his fist on the table. Let him speak. Robert's gaze flicked to me, apologizing without words. Then he stared straight at Dad. It wasn't Anthony's idea at first. Silence. Thick enough to choke on. Joseph covered his face. Anthony looked sick. Mom shook her head furiously. No. 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 Don't drag outsiders into this. Robert continued anyway. There was someone else, someone Dad trusted. Dad whispered. Who? Robert looked like he might faint. His lips trembled around the answer. Grandpa. The word fell like a hammer. Mom gasped. Dad's eyes widened, breath gone. Anthony and Joseph looked away. I just sat there, frozen. Because even whispering that name tasted wrong. Dad's face twisted into something I'd never seen. Not rage, not grief, but betrayal older than time. He spoke slowly, voice shaking. What do you mean? Grandpa. Robert swallowed hard. He visited more often than you knew. When you were gone, Mom called him to help with chores. He sat in the kitchen for hours. And he watched us. Mom grabbed Robert's arm. Stop lying. Robert pulled away, tears spilling. I saw him listening at Louise's door. He whispered to Anthony when he thought no one was awake. He told him. His voice broke. Dad stepped forward, towering over Mom. You called my father into this house? Mom's lips trembled. I needed help. I was exhausted. He's family. Dad shook his head, voice like gravel. He was poison. Robert continued. Grandpa told us that this house belongs to the men. That girls were supposed to obey. That brothers had rights. Anthony believed every word. Anthony exploded. I was a kid. I believed what I was taught. Robert sobbed. I'm sorry, I should have stopped it. I should have shouted. I should have told Dad. I didn't, because Grandpa said Dad wouldn't care. Dad's voice cracked open. He said what? Robert whispered. He said you were just like him. That you expected boys to act like men early. Dad staggered backward like he'd been punched. Mom whispered. George, please. Dad stared at her. You brought my father into this house. A man I escaped from. You let him near our kids. Mom collapsed into a chair, shaking violently. I didn't know. Robert spoke again, words trembling. I think he's the reason Anthony turned dark. Anthony roared. Shut your mouth. But he was crying. Big, angry tears. And the truth finally revealed itself. Anthony wasn't born cruel. He was shaped by an older man with old rod in his hands. The sheriff cleared his throat. Where is your grandfather now? Mom whispered. On his way here. He visits every Sunday. The kitchen walls seemed to pulse. Dad clenched his fists. Then he'll arrive any minute. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Every minute leading to noon had been heading toward this moment. Grandpa walking through the same door Mom opened so casually each week. My breath turned shallow. Robert wiped his tears and whispered. He told Anthony that Louise would be his someday. Anthony sobbed into his hands. Dad shook like he might break apart entirely. I will end this, he whispered. And then, as if summoned by the truth, a car engine rumbled outside. Tires rolled over gravel. Mom's head snapped up. The boys froze. Dad's eyes turned murderous. I couldn't breathe. The sheriff moved closer to the door, hand hovering near his belt. And through the thin kitchen window, I saw the shadow of Grandpa walking toward our house. The knock on our front door didn't sound like a greeting. It sounded like judgment. 3 sharp raps that froze every soul in the kitchen. Robert stopped breathing mid-sob. Anthony slid back in his chair, as if the wood had turned to fire. Joseph whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Mom covered her mouth. And Dad stood like a statue carved out of rage. Sheriff King placed a firm hand near his holster. Nobody moves, he warned. Outside, Grandpa's shadow passed across the frosted glass window pane, slow, confident, familiar. In that moment, I remembered every birthday card he had given me, every peppermint candy he'd tucked into my hand, every goodbye hug that seemed normal. How do monsters hide so well? Behind smiles, behind family ties, behind trust. The doorknob turned, the hinges groaned, and Grandpa walked in as if the world still belonged to him. Gray coat buttoned, hat tucked under one arm. That same lazy grin. What's with all the long faces? He asked. His voice echoed like poison poured into the room. Dad didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stared at the man who once tucked him into bed as a boy. Grandpa noticed the sheriff and frowned. Well now, this is unusual. The sheriff stepped forward. Harold Miller, we need you to answer some questions. Grandpa chuckled. No, Serif. I don't answer to children. Especially not men young enough to be my. Dad slammed his fist on the table. You will answer. Grandpa blinked, surprised by the fury in his son's voice. George, he said softly. Why are you shouting? Dad took a step forward. Because I finally see you. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. And what is it you think you see? Dad's voice dropped into a whisper that shook the room. Old. In you. In the boys. In this house. And I want to know how deep it goes. Something flickered in Grandpa's eyes. Not fear, but annoyance. He turned toward Anthony. Boy, tell your daddy to sit down. He's embarrassing himself. Anthony didn't move. Didn't breathe. Grandpa frowned deeper. Anthony. Anthony stared at his own trembling hands. I'm not your boy anymore. Grandpa scoffed. Oh please. You were made in my image. Dad inhaled sharply at that. Exactly our problem. The sheriff stepped closer. Harold, I need you to hear something. Grandpa held up a hand. No, I'll speak first. He turned to face me, and the room went colder. His stare crawled across my skin like winter wind. You caused all this trouble, little girl? He asked. Running around crying wolf? My body shook. Before I could speak, Dad growled. Don't you talk to her. Grandpa laughed. There it is, the protective father act. 16 years too late. Dad snapped. He lunged forward, but the sheriff stepped between them, hand pressed to Dad's chest. Not yet, he warned. Dad trembled, fists clenched, tears burning in his eyes. Tell me the truth, he demanded. What did you teach my sons? Grandpa shrugged. The same thing my father taught me. Dad's face twisted. And what's that? Grandpa smirked. That women must be controlled. Mom gasped so loudly the sound echoed. Anthony covered his mouth. Joseph looked like he would vomit. Robert sobbed again. The sheriff's expression hardened like cement. That's enough. You're under arrest. Grandpa laughed. You have no evidence. But then, Robert spoke, voice soft but deadly. I saw you. Grandpa turned. What? Robert wiped his tears. I saw you whisper to Anthony. I saw you listening outside Louise's room. I heard what you told him. Grandpa's smile cracked. You lying brat. Anthony stood suddenly. All of it was you. His voice shook violently. You twisted my head. You made me believe things that weren't true. Grandpa's face drained of color. The sheriff took a step forward. That sounds like admission. Grandpa swung around, reaching toward the door. But Dad blocked it. You aren't walking out again, Dad growled. Not today. Not ever. For the first time, Grandpa looked afraid. Real fear. The kind that shows up on a man who's lived his whole life without consequences. The sheriff grabbed his wrist. Grandpa struggled. But age had stolen his strength. Handcuffs clicked shut. Cold metal mercy. The whole house exhaled. Anthony collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Joseph hugged himself. Robert stared at the floor, whispering prayers. I looked at Dad. And he looked at me. And heartbreak passed between us like silent lightning. For the first time in years, Dad knelt down and held my face in his palms. I'm here, he whispered. I swear, I will never leave again. Tears rolled down my cheeks. But hope was still fragile. Because even as Grandpa was dragged outside, I realized something terrifying. Evil doesn't vanish when a door closes. It lingers. It stains. It spreads. And justice isn't the end of the story. It's only the start of the consequences. Because what none of us knew yet was this. Grandpa wasn't working alone. There was another adult in our lives. Someone we trusted. Holding a secret darker than his.